Chapter 12. Alien Ghost. John. I pulled out of the driveway and onto the street, when all of a sudden a faint image appeared in the passenger seat. I, at once, recognized the dark leather uniform. "You!" The word barely escaped my mouth as he grabbed my throat, clutching it tightly with one hand. I was forced to push the gears into neutral. The car rolled to the curb, where it stalled. I gripped his wrist tightly, resisting his hold until his voice demanded my attention. "Listen!" He sneered, nearing. I focused on him. He wasn't squeezing. I wondered why, with a chance like this, he didn't just kill me. He stared into my eyes. His mind merged with mine, and I knew beyond the wrinkle in his brow and the glitter in his purple eyes, she was in pain. Claudia was on the floor of the kitchen, clutching her stomach. Sweat gathered on her brow as she trembled. "I might despise you for taking the only thing that holds any meaning to me, but she needs help," he growled and released me. Before I could react, he was gone. "Claudia, I'm coming," I said. I grabbed at the steering wheel, turned the car back on, pulled the gear back into position, and shot out from the side of the road towards her house. I got there, leaped out of the car, and raced to the front. I tried the knob, but it was locked. Shit. I moved around the house and looked towards her window. Above, the window was open. I climbed without haste up the tree, onto the branch, and pulled myself inside. I raced into Claudia's room, down the steps, and into the kitchen. Claudia was on the floor, unconscious and unresponsive. "Claudia!" I panicked. I lifted her in my arms and rushed out of the kitchen. She didn't move or speak. "Claudia!" I called to her as I moved toward the front door. Her eyes fluttered open with difficulty. "John?" she said as she reached up to touch my cheek. Her face wrinkled as a sharp pain shot through her body. Connected as we were, I could feel the stabbing pain in a much lower frequency. Her face twisted in pain and agony. "It's okay. I'm here," I soothed, but I was afraid I couldn't help her. I didn't even have a clue what was wrong with her. The pain came again in a sharp, stabbing flash. Even when the intensity eased, Claudia remained in a state of agony. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. Weak, she shuddered in my arms. She had no strength, no energy. I sensed her pain. Something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help her. I carried her into my Jag. There was no time to call an ambulance. I sat her up in the passenger seat. She opened her eyes and clutched tightly at her stomach. I felt the sharp blows ripping inside her once again. The pain in her abdomen returned. I got in and turned on the car. "I'm taking you to the hospital," I said as I raced onto the side street. I grabbed at my phone and began to dial Joseph. He answered on the third ring. "Joseph here." "We have a problem," I said, biting hard at my lower lip as Claudia grabbed at her stomach again. "What up?" he asked. "It's Claudia. I'm taking her to the hospital." "What's going on?" "I'm not sure. I found her in the kitchen. She seems to be in a lot of pain." "What hospital?" "Memorial Hospital. Track me if you need to know the address. I'm pulling into the ER now." "Have you notified Michael?" "Not yet. I can call him after I hang up with you." "No need. I'll grab him. Might not be able to leave. Keep me posted until I can get there." "Got it." I dropped the call and pulled into an empty space near the entrance of the building. An ambulance was pulling away as I opened the vehicle door and lifted Claudia into my arms. I carried her inside. The hospital was a little busy when I got in. A few doctors stood on call near the entrance. "I need help," I immediately said as I walked up to the front desk. The nurse quickly looked up from the call she was on. She didn't look concerned in the least. I guess in her line of work you saw the worst of the worst, especially in the ER. She set a form in front of me. "Fill this out," she said with a hand over the phone receiver. "I'll need insurance, and if you don't have it, I'll need some form of payment." "Can't someone just look at her? My girlfriend is in a lot of pain. Please." Sir, you're gonna have to take a seat and wait your turn. She motioned to the side where two people, a man who looked like he needed stitches, and a woman who looked like she had twisted her ankle, were waiting. The woman's foot was purple and blue from what I could see. I need to speak to a doctor, please, I begged. Sir? She said in that stern, no-nonsense tone. Listen, miss, I growled, holding Claudia tightly in my arms. I found her unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Can't someone just examine her, make sure she's okay? I couldn't help when a few tears escaped my eyes. I pressed her close to me and whispered into her ear that she was going to be okay. I was contemplating calling Dr. Nicholson to help her. He was a doctor, after all. I would do anything he asked me if he helped her. Please, I politely begged. I was willing to do whatever it took for the woman I loved. I can't help you until you take a seat and fill out the forms. Fuck your forms. Listen to me. I just want a doctor to look at her. I'll fucking sign anything you want me to after. I just need to make sure she's okay. Sir, you're gonna have to lower your voice. I felt my blood boil. The dancing in my eyes began. My heart was beating at the top of my head, increasing with every word that left her mouth, knowing she wasn't listening, and Claudia was suffering because of her. Just when I felt I would lose it, a gentle voice came from behind me to say, I'll take a look at her. I spun around with Claudia still in my arms. A pair of dark eyes greeted me. The white lab coat seemed to richen the tan of his skin. He smiled pleasantly. It's okay, Denise. I'll take care of it. He placated the receptionist. His eyes once again found mine as he asked, May I? I nodded as he neared. He took his stethoscope and approached cautiously. He pressed one end to an area near her neck. He put a hand over her head. She was running a fever, something I was already aware of. He looked fairly young for a doctor, but he was willing to help and seemed to have the appropriate authority. Are you a doctor? Yes. He glanced up with a smile. I tried to smile confidently, but couldn't get over this youthful appearance. I always imagined doctors much older, like Dr. Nicholson, for instance. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but you just look quite young. I felt Claudia pressing into me and squeezing my side. John. Even in so much pain, she still found the energy to scold me. I guess she thought I was being a little rude. The doctor smiled wide. He lifted a badge. Well, I assure you, I'm a real doctor. His grin let me know he didn't take offense to my line of questioning. They don't just give these to anyone. Yeah, they do, I thought. Claudia picked up on the thought immediately. John. She tugged at me again. You would know, wouldn't you? It warmed my heart she tried to make contact with me even in her present state. How do you feel? Like shit. It comes slowly, then... I felt it just as she was about to describe it. I'm sorry. Why? There's very little you can do, John Slater. I should have been there. You are here, John. Come on this way, the young doctor said as he motioned for me to follow. I hurried alongside him as he observed Claudia in my arms. He led me further into the hospital and into an empty hospital room. He ordered me to place Claudia on an empty bed. I did. So, what happened? He asked. I don't know. I found her on the kitchen floor, I said, pushing back at the locks of my hair. I loomed over her, holding her hand. My hands were trembling. I knew she could feel it. I couldn't think of what I would do if I lost her. She's been grabbing at her stomach, I said, recalling her agonizing cries and the sensations I felt each time a sharp pain stabbed her. Can you describe the pain, sweetheart? The doctor asked, nearing. Her only response was a groan. It's like a sharp stabbing, I said to him. He nodded as he looked at her, trying to pry her hands away from her lower abdomen. She looked up at him. Honey, I need for you to take your hands away from the lower part of your abdomen. Tell me where you're feeling most of the pain. My side hurts. She motioned to her lower right side. He nodded. This side? He pressed down and noticed the tenderness. Ah. He made a few more examinations. His lips curved slightly. He looked rather silly. I wondered if he knew what faces he made. He glanced at Claudia's eyes, pushing back at her hair, and smiled over at her. You'll be all right, darling. His words struck a jealous chord in me. She observed him from the bed. I suspected she was trying to read him. Sorry, just thinking. He apologized for his silence during the examination. Kidney? No. Appendix? All the symptoms point to these possibilities. Claudia projected a few of his thoughts to me, but she was weak. It made it hard to concentrate on anything but the pain stabbing at her. I had no idea what other thoughts were racing in his mind, but he seemed to know what he was doing. When Claudia cringed, he acknowledged her distress. His youth kept me questioning his knowledge, but what he lacked in experience, he seemed to make up for in wisdom. Have you ever had your appendix removed? He asked Claudia. No? Her answer sounded more like a question. She's running a fever, he said, taking her temperature. What is it? Do you know what's wrong with her? I asked. Are you family? I hesitated for a moment. Yes, well, I'm her boyfriend. Any family here I can talk to? No, her guardian is on his way, though. Well, she's going to need surgery, that's certain. Surgery? What the fuck for? My voice rose. I inhaled to ease the stress. It's all right. I know it's scary, but she'll be okay, he assured me. What's going on? What happened to her? Her appendix ruptured. It will have to be removed. I ran a hand over the back of my neck. It's a routine operation and not life-threatening if treated quickly. It's a good thing you brought her in when you did. I dropped near the bed, grabbing at her hand. When will she go to surgery? I'm afraid she has to go now. It has to come out immediately or her condition will deteriorate rather quickly. See, when the appendix ruptures, it releases toxins into the stomach. After surgery, she'll need a course of antibiotics to make sure we tackle all eventualities. While the operation is fairly standard, if left untreated, her condition can be fatal. He explained in detail for my benefit. I'll get the nurse to come in here and help her get ready. The young doctor stopped halfway out. Oh, you might want to tell them you're married. They only allow family in the room. He smiled. I appreciate it. John, I heard a faint whisper from beside me. Claudia, I said as she stared up at me. What's going on? Where am I? Was that a doctor? She was completely out of it. You're in the hospital. Her lips quivered each time she felt a sharp pain shooting out of her abdomen. Am I going to be okay? Of course, baby. The doctor said your appendix ruptured, and it will have to be removed. I took her hand, and she squeezed. Are you okay? She asked me. I tried to smile. No, you had me scared, Miss Bell. Claudia reached over to wipe at the few tears that had fallen from my eyes in my desperation to get her help. I felt the pain shooting through her as I caught the twisted expression upon her face. Almost immediately, a nurse came in. She carried a gown and set it on the bed. Let's get her dressed for surgery, the nurse said. I helped dress Claudia into a medical gown. The nurse gave me a look when I told her I was her husband. Even that statement made Claudia look over at me, but the nurse said nothing. Claudia was hooked to an IV. The nurse hung fluids and began an antibiotic and a saline drip. The doctor entered the room again. Am I going to have to miss prom? Claudia asked as the doctor checked the IV and instructed the nurse on the dosage. Well, that's hard to say. 1 to 3 weeks for laparoscopic surgery and 2 to 4 weeks for an open surgery before a patient can return to normal. Right now it's looking like a rupture and we may have to drain your incision. Don't worry, dear. I'm going to take good care of you, okay? The doctor looked over at me and smiled. He handed me a clipboard with a few forms to fill out. We're going to get ready to wheel her into surgery. Are you the one performing the surgery? I'm sorry, I don't think I got your name. I glanced at the badge on the side of his white coat. The coat reminded me of the lab coats that Dr. Nicholson wore when he was in his lab with his beakers. Dr. Spencer, he said before I finished reading his name tag. My name's John. I'm sorry about the incident out in the hall. I apologized. I was just... It's okay. She's just very important to me. It's okay. Please forgive Denise. There's protocol that nurses have to follow. Sometimes that interferes with their humanity. I'm just glad I was here to assist. Medical care shouldn't be denied just because someone doesn't have health care. Most people end up being treated like criminals for that reason alone. I'm sure Claudia has medical insurance, but even if she didn't, I am willing and more than able to pay the bill, I arrogantly voiced. Dr. Spencer didn't look convinced. That's quite kind of you. He grinned. I could tell I was no more than a kid in his eyes. He didn't understand how I would have the means to pay her hospital bill. Even if my family was wealthy, chances were my family wouldn't be willing to foot the bill for someone else's child. He didn't know I made my own money. And, living as I did on the company's dime, I hadn't had much use for spending those funds. They'd had a chance to accumulate. Is she going to be okay? I asked. There was no sense in fighting over my bank account. She'll be fine. I'm going to have to ask you to step out into the waiting room. You can fill out the forms out there and give them to the nurse once you're finished. I leaned closer to Claudia. I have to go now, baby. I'll be outside waiting once this is over. She nodded stiffly and squeezed my hand. 2 other nurses came in and began to wheel the bed out of the room. Dr. Spencer walked me to the door. Claudia's eyes didn't leave me. Dr. Spencer reached into his medical coat and took out a card. Here's my card, in case we get shuffled around, or if you or her guardian have any questions. I took his card, glancing briefly at it. In the hall, Dr. Spencer turned the opposite way, following the bed that carried Claudia. I watched her being wheeled away. It felt like hours, but it had only been a few minutes. I had been sitting, twiddling my thumbs, while Denise gave me a resentful look. I filled the papers out and handed them to her. I texted Joseph with an update on Claudia's condition. He informed me that he had managed to arrange for one of the assistant principals to cover for him, so he could get to the hospital. He was on his way from the parking lot. Michael walked in just behind him. They seemed to have come in together. Michael immediately asked, "How is she? What did the doctor say? Have you heard anything?" "First things first, take a breath, sir." He did, but was obviously unhappy about doing so. "She's doing fine," I said as he let out his breath. "The doctor said her appendix ruptured, causing her pain. It's only been a few minutes since they took her into surgery." "What happened?" Michael asked. I ran a hand over the back of my neck and began to explain. "I came to pick her up. When she didn't answer the door or her phone, I got worried." Michael's confusion was evident. "I climbed up the tree next to her window and came in from there." My voice dropped to a whisper. His eyes softened, but there was a new realization in his mind. The access to her room was too convenient. I could tell by the look in his eyes he was grateful for the measures I had taken, but didn't like that I could get into her room in such a way. "She was on the kitchen floor when I found her." Michael looked uneasy by the news I was giving him. The idea that Claudia was laying on the floor in pain, alone and helpless, disturbed him incredibly. "It's just her appendix," I assured him again. "The doctor said it's a fairly routine procedure. He assured me she will be fine." "I'm glad you were there. They told me at the desk you've already taken care of the paperwork?" Michael asked. "I thought it would be one less thing for you to worry about, sir." Michael nodded. "Thanks, John. I'm glad you were able to be there for her." "Me too," I whispered. Joseph walked over as I moved alongside Michael. He greeted Michael as we walked and took a seat. Michael dropped onto the seat to wait. I took the seat beside Joseph, a few spaces from Michael. "Hey, Joseph," I greeted. "How are you holding up, kid?" Joseph asked. I gave a gesture signifying I wasn't holding up very well. Joseph flipped the fitness magazine he'd been looking at shut. "What are you thinking?" he suddenly asked. He knew there was something on my mind. "Project X," I whispered. His questioning stare shot straight through me. "Why is that on your mind when your girl is there having surgery?" "I saw him," I admitted. Joseph moved the closed magazine from his lap onto the table. His mind was now too distracted to focus on anything else. "What do you mean you saw him?" he asked as he glanced around to ensure no one was listening too closely. The hospital was getting busy. The nurses were all at their stations and patients were spread throughout the waiting room. We had commandeered one section for ourselves with the begrudging support of the staff. But that wouldn't last long if the place continued to fill up. It seemed the surgical section of the hospital was under reconstruction and off limits until further notice. We were instructed to wait in the waiting room near the ER. He appeared in my car, right next to me. I whispered, glancing over at Michael, who was busy sending messages from his phone. Joseph gave me a perplexed look. I could see the questions in his mind. Before he could ask anything, I continued my account. He was the one that told me about Claudia. He said she needed help. He showed me, actually. He projected her image into my mind. I saw her, and I knew he wanted me to help her. He was doing it for her. I ground my teeth. Joseph could tell it moved me to know another being wanted to keep the girl that I loved safe. It's hard to accept that the creature loved her just as much as I did, though. He would have to call on another she loved to protect her in his absence. He did. I nodded with difficulty. I would have eventually ended up in her house, of course, but it might have taken longer. Wow, Joseph said, the shock evident on his face. It was not what I expected from him. What do you think it wants with her? He's been a constant presence. He's attacked at least twice from what I've gathered. Joseph glanced over at me. Has she said anything? I shook my head. If she's the source, that could be the reason he wants her. But what does that mean? I still don't understand that. Joseph didn't answer. Either he didn't have an answer, or he knew I wouldn't like the answer he did have. Shit. I have to figure it out. I'm not letting him harm her. I doubt he wants to harm her. Joseph tried to calm me. He did warn you she needed help. I shot him a glance. Was he taking the foreigner's side? If he wants to take her away from me, then he plans to harm her. I whispered, looking over my shoulder. Maybe we can give the boss the alien, Joseph suggested. I glared back as Joseph was looking into the distance, watching as an ambulance brought in a patient. They were saying he had a gunshot wound. What do you mean? I asked over the chaos in the ER. I'm saying we give the boss the alien, and he moves on. Problem. I disagreed. Joseph narrowed his eyes back. He doesn't want the alien, you know that. I frowned. He wants Claudia. I know. But if he thinks the alien follows the source, then with the alien in his possession, we might be able to convince him that's all he needs. No, it'll never work. Project X won't stop coming after her. He'll just lead Dr. Nicholson back to her all over again. Joseph huffed, realizing I was right. Shit. Sorry, kid. I'm trying, bud, but it's looking bleak. The only thing now is getting you to do what you said you'd do. You need to make me disappear. Joseph nodded, but not quite resigned to the deed. Well, I still have a few other options. I looked over at him. Yeah? What kind? He grinned wide. I ignored his smile when I caught sight of Dr. Spencer approaching from the end of the long hall. I immediately rose, hoping he would have news about Claudia's condition. Michael followed when he caught sight of what I was doing. Joseph was only a step behind. Dr. Spencer looked overwhelmed by our group. I could tell by the way he slowed down before approaching. John? Yeah? I answered. How you doing? Still holding up? Trying to, sir, I answered. He smiled, looking over at my companions. Dr. Spencer, this is Michael McClellan. He's Claudia's guardian. I introduced as I pointed to Michael. Then I gestured to Joseph to finish my introductions. And I'm Joseph, the uncle. A pleasure to meet you, sir, Dr. Spencer said, reaching to shake Michael's hand. Joseph offered him a smile and reached over to shake his hand as well. I hope you're taking good care of our girl, Joseph intimidatingly said. It surprised me. I glanced back over at him. Our girl? Since when is Claudia his girl? It was nice to know he cared about her, but I wouldn't deny it made me a tad jealous. Dr. Spencer flashed him an innocent smile. It was obvious Joseph had made his presence felt. He could be a little threatening. "Are you a doctor?" Michael asked. Dr. Spencer hesitated. This question seemed to catch him off guard, and judging by our little group, he received it quite frequently. "You're rather young for a doctor." Michael realized what he had said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it." "It's quite all right. I get that all the time." "How is she?" I immediately interrupted. "She's doing great. In fact, they're wheeling her into recovery. You'll be able to see her pretty soon. Just hang in there. I'll get one of the nurses to come get all of you when she's ready." "That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Spencer," Michael said. Dr. Spencer dismissed himself and walked to the main desk where the same nurse, Denise, was seated. He handed her a clipboard and took another. Another ambulance arrived. Dr. Spencer pulled himself away from the desk and hurried to the entrance as the paramedics pushed in the gurney with the patient. "What do we have?" he asked the paramedics. The voices were muffled by the cries of the man on the gurney. Part of his hand was covered in blood. "Robbery. Gunshot to the chest." I turned away as they pushed him past us. Dr. Spencer glanced over me as he took the clipboard and hurried alongside the gurney. "Hurry, take him into surgery," he ordered. 2 nurses leaped into action. I couldn't imagine myself doing something so engaging. Dr. Spencer and the nurses disappeared behind the double doors that led to the surgical rooms.